Hello and welcome back to the Football Fellowship. Today we're going to be assessing the entire Manchester United squad. We've got a total of 36 first team players for Man United and we need to sort them into 5 categories: start, bench, loan, sell and contract exit. And without further ado, let's get into it. And up first, it is the goalkeepers, and the number one for Manchester United. It is Andre Onana, and he's had a very mixed season since he joined from Inter Milan in the summer. He's got actually the second highest save percentage of any Premier League goalkeeper this season with 74.6%, which is 0.1% worse than Alphonso Areola, who's actually in first, and actually 0.1% better than the goalkeeper in third, who is Alisson Becker, who a lot of people consider the best in the world. He's also got 8 clean sheets this season with the same amount of clean sheets as Martinez at Aston Villa, 1 less than Ederson at Man City, and he's a little bit further behind than Bernd Leno at Fulham, David Raya at Arsenal and Jordan Pickford at Everton. However, it's not all rosy for Andre Onana this season. He has conceded 55 goals for Manchester United this season. However, that has come after facing 188 shots this season, which is the second most of any goalkeeper in the Premier League this season. He's actually level on shots faced alongside West Foderingham of Sheffield United, and they've had the worst defence so far this season and actually in Premier League history. But he's also played 7 games less, and that just goes to show that Andre Onana hasn't had a good season. And actually, the only goalkeeper ahead of him is Kaminsky of Luton Town, and he's actually played a game more, so there's still time for Onana to catch up. And not only that, you got to say that Onana has a big hand to play in the fact that Manchester United were out of the Champions League and didn't get any European football after the group stage, after his horrendous performances in the Champions League. I think it was one where definitely moments to forget for him, and I think a lot of the failures of the Champions League campaign can be set at his door. However, he did have a lot of expectation on him after he had to place long-standing goalkeeper David De Gea, who previously won numerous Golden Glove awards and Player of the Season for Manchester United. However, with all that being said, I think Andre Onana is still definitely a start and a keep. With everything I've just said, I think you still need to factor in the fact that this is still his first season in the Premier League, and it's one where he's had a very rocky defensive ahead of him with a lot of injuries. And I think we all know he's a quality keeper from his time at Ajax and Inter Milan, so he's only had 1 year. Give him time, and I think you definitely keep and start him. And then we move on to his number 2, Altay Bayindir, who joined from Fenerbahce in the summer as well for 4.3 million, and he's only played 1 game so far this season, which was in the FA Cup 4th round against Newport County, which was a 4-2 win. And it's one where I actually expected him to play a few more games than he has so far, maybe some of the cup competitions. And there was even a decent shout early on in the season when Onana was really struggling, especially in that Champions League campaign, which you just mentioned, that, maybe it was time to take him out of the firing line, maybe put in Bayindir. But I think one key area which really highlighted to me maybe had the lack of faith that Ten Hag has in Bayindir is the whole fiasco around Onana and whether he's going to go to AFCON with Cameroon or not. Them trying to get him to stay and then fly him out the next day in order to start the next game for Cameroon. The whole thing kind of just showed me that I don't think Ten Hag has confidence in Bayindir. Whatever he's seen of him in training, he doesn't trust his goalkeeping abilities. I think from a player management perspective though, I think Ten Hag did sign this player. It is one of his signings. He does need to play him occasionally, just in the League Cups or FA Cup matches where it doesn't really mean anything. Maybe 3 or 4 games a season, just to keep him happy, because essentially you signed a player for 4.3 million and he's going to be very discontent if you don't give him some more minutes than he has. Maybe you can say he's at Manchester United, but even then I think you'd like to play a few more cup games. But again, I think this is a very easy one. I think you keep him and I think you bench him, but you maybe give him a little bit more game time next year. And then the third choice goalkeeper, Tom Heaton, 38-year-old Tom Heaton, who rejoined Manchester United in 2021, his boyhood club, and only made a couple of appearances in cup competitions. He hasn't made a single league appearance in the 3 years since he's rejoined. And I think it's one where I'm sure he's a good lad in and around the dressing room, but at 38 and he's reportedly on wages around 45 to 60,000 pounds a week, I just think that's a little bit much. This is not a particular position I feel very strongly about. I think it's one where you can quickly move on. Me personally, I'm going to say it's a contract exit, but if Man United want to renew his contract for 1 more year and keep him around the place, I don't think it's the end of the world. Next up is Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who's only 26 years old. I thought he was a couple years older than that. He's been around for a long time, been playing for Man United and in the Premier League for a while now. And I think it's one where he's very versatile. He can play right back and left back. People even say he can have a shot at playing centre back. We haven't quite seen that for Crystal Palace or Manchester United, but I think it'll be interesting to see that maybe one day in the future. But he's got a very unique skill set where he's fantastic as a 1v1 1v1 defender. I think it's something that no one else in the Manchester United squad has, and I think it's actually something that not many defenders in Europe generally have. I think he's excellent in a 1v1 situation. But I think his on-the-ball ability has actually really improved drastically since Erik ten Hag has taken over, and it's one where last season I thought he should have been starting ahead of Diogo Dalot, but this season he's stagnated, if anything actually regressed a little bit, and the injuries haven't helped him either. And I like Wan-Bissaka, I really do, but I think with only 1 year left on his contract at 26 years of age, I don't think Man United should be offering him a new one. I think they really need to be cashing in, and I think they need to be selling him. It's actually something the club haven't been really good at in recent years. In fact, getting players at a decent age and selling them on when the time has come. I think they've done it with a lot of players where they get them contracts. They've seen them players go out to the end of their new contracts and just lose them for nothing or pedants really. And I think it's one where if Man United really want to have a rebuild, I think Wan-Bissaka is easily a sellable asset they can sell this summer. And then we move on to the other right back, which is Diogo Dalot. And actually, this is actually a player who, in my opinion, has a shot of being Man United's player of the season so far. 25 years old, he's made 46 appearances this season in all competitions, and I think it's one where he's been playing right back and left back similar to Wan-Bissaka, but I think his consistency, he's actually improved so much in the last few years, defensively and offensively, and I think it's one where he's actually a key player for Erik ten Hag, and any new manager coming, if United were to decide to get rid of Ten Hag this summer, would absolutely look at Dalot and say, I can absolutely work with him. He's a player who's just reaching his prime, can even get even better. And for Man United to improve on Diogo Dalot, I think they'll need to spend a lot this summer. So therefore, I think not only is a keep, but I think he's a start. And if he one day doesn't turn out to be the perfect right back for Man United, and he ends up dropping down onto being on the bench or maybe being a substitute, then I think his versatility playing right back and left back is perfectly suited. I think it's one where he can definitely be in the squad going forward, and I think this is an easy start. And now we're going to move across to the other side of the defence, the left backs, which is a very difficult position, I think. I think we're going to start off with Luke Shaw, who at the moment is 28 years old. He's played 15 times this season for Man United, 12 times in the Premier League. And this is a really difficult one because he is still Man United's first choice left back. He is still England's first choice left back. And when he is fit and when he is available, he is fantastic. And we've seen last season under Ten Hag, not only the left back, but a left centre back as well. His versatility in that position, his ability to be one of the best ball carriers in that defence, and also defensively, he's always solid and never going to let you down. But his injury issues are a thing that we need to talk about. Since he joined from Southampton in 2014, he's only made 30 appearances or more twice in the season for Man United. Twice out of 10 years. That is not a great return for a player who's on 150 grand a week. That is actually quite expensive, and I think something which Man United need to look at long term. But I think in terms of this summer, I think he's fine. Because I think Man United have bigger issues than trying to replace Luke Shaw. So when he is fit, he is a start, but we have to talk about the depth and options. And therefore, we come up to our next player, Tyrell Malacia, who was actually Erik ten Hag's first signing as Manchester United manager. And I didn't actually realise he played 35 times last season in all competitions. I didn't realise he made that many appearances. However, this season, he has been missing for the entirety of it. He picked up a knee injury in the summer, and which you haven't actually heard much about that. He's kind of been missing in action for the entirety of the season. And I think it's difficult because you've got Luke Shaw who's injury prone. You've got now Malacia who's had a whole season out. You don't know what kind of player he's going to be when he comes back. There is a decision to be made at left back, and if it's whether you decide to stick with both of them or maybe you think to yourself maybe you need a new one. But I think you aren't going to be able to sell either Luke Shaw or Tyrell Malacia just because of their injury issues. And this is a bit of a tough one, but I think it has to just be a bench just because I don't think anyone's going to come in for them. And so you still got the two injury left backs of Luke Shaw and Tyrell Malacia. And so you think, so maybe you need another left back, maybe you don't. I don't really know what Man United do with the left back position. Maybe you just cross your fingers and hope to both fit next season. I'm not entirely sure. But I think we'll have to wait and see on those two. And then we'll come on to a couple of loanee Manchester United players. And we're going to start off with Brandon Williams. He's on loan at Ipswich Town. I think it's one where this is quite straightforward. His contract actually ends this summer. I think it's one where Man United don't renew it and he let his contract end. I think it's because he's been on loan at Ipswich. He's had some personal reasons which I can't really comment on because you don't know for certain if they're true or not. But I think it's one where if you can't start at 23 years of age for a championship side, then you can't start for Man United and you can't really be in and around that squad. I think for me, you just let his contract end. I think you let him find another club, and I think it's one where you move on. He started off the season at loan at Granada, however, he wasn't getting too many minutes, so he got recalled and then he got sent back out on loan to Benfica, who actually have an obligation to buy if he plays 50% of their games, which is of €6 million, which equates to roughly 5.1 million and then that's also 2.5 million with add-ons. So there's a cheeky 7.6 million to be made if Benfica do sign him permanently. However, it depends. We have to wait and see if they do, because if there's no obligation, they can still decide to buy him themselves. And I think it's one where I was quite interested to see if he got minutes at Man United, especially after they let Reguilon go back on loan to Tottenham Hotspur, which I thought was a massive mistake. But anyway, with Shaw and Malacia out all injured, playing Fernandes in some couple of games this season wouldn't have been the worst of things to do, especially when you looked at the likes of Kobbie Mainoo, Alejandro Garnacho, Willy Kambwala, who've all come into the Man United squad and done all right this season. It would have been really interesting to see him. But I think it's one where they do also have an option to buy him back later on. So I think it's one where this actually Man United have done a fantastic job with, because he's not good enough to start for Man United here and now, but he's going to go to a side in Benfica, hopefully, that who's going to play at the very highest level in the Portuguese league and play some decent European football as well. He's going to go there, develop at a club who has a track record of developing youngsters, and if they do end up flourishing him into a promising talent, they can always sign him back. So I think sell, and hopefully to Benfica, is the ideal one for this. And now we're moving on to the centre backs. I'm going to start off with Jonny Evans, who I'm surprised is even at Manchester United, but in all fairness, credit to him, because he's played 26 times in all competitions this season, 20 times in Premier League, and he hasn't done too badly. He hasn't set the world alight, but what else do you expect from a 36-year-old whose best days are probably behind him? But he's actually come in and done a decently solid job, and Man United have definitely needed that, especially when you consider the injuries to some of the other centre-backs that they picked up along the course of the season. So he's been much needed, and he's a free transfer, so it's not the end of the world. And what's not to like about Jonny Evans? However, he is 36, he's not the future of the club. I think it's one where you let his contract exit in the summer, and it's one where you maybe give an opportunity to a younger player if those minutes were to arise in the future. And now we're going on to a big player, Raphael Varane. And this is a really tough one, and one which I couldn't actually split too much until the very last minute, because he hasn't played too many times for Man United. In his first season, he played 29 appearances. In the second, he made 34, and this season he's made 30 so far, which isn't a bad return for a player who you probably associate with being injury prone. He's actually played a lot more games than you think. However, he is 31 years old, which isn't too old, but he is on £340,000 a week, which is a lot of money for a player who's not going to be playing week in, week out. And it's a tough one, because you obviously know he's a class player when he plays. You obviously know he's still got it in him. But is he the future for Manchester United? No. He is, at the age where he's getting on a little bit. However, could he still keep it up at the top level? Yes. But the issue is his contract. His contract expires this summer. Man United do have an option to extend it for a further year. However, that would be at his current wage level, which I think frankly is a little bit too high for a player who's not available week in, week out. And this is a player who's won the Champions League on 4 occasions with Real Madrid, and he is fantastic. However, I think you probably want a leader, and I don't think he's quite that. I think he's a player who does his job really, really well, but I don't think he impacts the rest of his back line as a leader would. And so I think with all the factors, with this being his contract expiring, I think Man United need to move on, get his wages off the bill. And I think it is a contract exit, and you can see he's in black and white, so he's very sad about it. I'm very sad about it, because I think he is class, but I think it is one where it's time to go. But a player who was a lot easier decision to make was Lisandro Martinez, who has had a terrible time with injuries this season. He broke his metatarsal, he came back, played 11 games, and then he sustained a knee ligament injury. It's one where he's had a season very curtailed, and I think it's not anything is his own fault. I think he had a little bit of complications as well, so he needs to come back, be fully fit. There's a chance he might be fit for the FA Cup final, which Man United fans should be very pleased about, because he is class. I think it's very easy for me, and this is so easy because he's not only a keep, but when he's fully fit, he is a start as well. There is nothing not to love about Lisandro Martinez. An absolute warrior in that Man United backline, something they desperately need. He's fantastic on the ball as well. And despite the fact that everyone, made fun of him for his height and he was too small to be a centre-back, he's actually done really, really well. He's got one of the highest heading winning percentages of any Premier League defender. So definitely a keep, definitely a start. And then we come on to the much maligned Harry Maguire, a player who's always given his all for Man United, and I think at times hasn't been good enough, but I don't think that's his own fault. I think he is giving everything he can. I just don't think he is quite that level that Man United need of a world-class centre-back. I think it's one with the price tag, £80 million from Leicester, it really ended any chance he had of having a successful career at Manchester United before it even began. I think it's one where actually he's brought it back a little bit. People are actually getting on board and saying, you know what, he's actually giving it his all. So what if he's not good enough? I mean, that's all you can ask for from a Man United player. But I think it's one where at 31 years of age, 190 grand a week, probably do want to sell him. However, if I'm already saying that Jonny Evans and Varane also need to leave, then there's a discussion to be had where maybe you keep him even though he's got 1 year left in his contract. And this is where I want to talk about Harry Maguire and Victor Lindelof. And Lindelof is 29, he's 30 in July, so also on the wrong side of 30, and you know, he's on 120 grand a week, not as much as Harry Maguire, but still a decent chunk. And they both have 1 year left. And I think it's one where Maguire and Lindelof, you can let one of them go as long as you don't sell both of them. I don't think you can ever say either player has never given 100% for Man United. I think both of them have always given it their all, but I just think that neither of them are good enough. But you can't get rid of all your centre backs. So if Martinez is the only centre back we're keeping so far, and Evans and Varane are going, you need to keep one, and one of them stays on the bench. And it depends on what offers you get in the summer. I think you will get higher bids for Harry Maguire, but it is one where I think Harry Maguire is actually the better centre-back for Man and plays more games for them this season. So it's one where, you know, if you get a decent bid for Lindelof, you let him go, you keep Maguire. If you get a decent bid for Maguire, you let him go, you keep Lindelof. I think in terms of which one is the better centre-back, I think you probably keep Harry Maguire on the bench, let his contract run out next summer. I think you try and sell Victor Lindelof this summer. And then the final defender is a youngster. It is Willy Kambwala, the 19-year-old centre-back, who's really impressed me at times when he's come in, but I also think he struggled a little bit. He made 7 Premier League appearances this season, 2 FA Cup appearances which were off the bench. And I think it's one where he's had some decent games. Liverpool in particular in the FA Cup, he really impressed me coming in to what was a cauldron of a game and an atmosphere, and he really held his own and did well against the front line who, you know, had international experience and some world-class players. But then again, on the other hand, he played the game against Bournemouth, I think it was, where he got absolutely destroyed by Dominic Solanke. He wasn't really helped by his fullback of Diogo Dalot, but I think he was one where he had a really bad game. But he's only young, so you don't want to throw him under the bus too soon. And it's a tough one for me, because again, I'm not really sure what the right answer is, and I'm not too fussed what happens. I think you could either loan him out this season, and I think you could give him to a championship, maybe a League One side, get him some experience, build up his body a little bit more. Or you could keep him on the bench and keep him in rotation, maybe use him in cup games, or if you have a serious injury issues as the 4th or 5th choice centre-back. I think for me personally, I'm going to say keep him on the bench, because I think he can still do well for the Man United under 21 side, and then when you need him, he can play in some, you know, rotation games, in some League Cup games. So I think it's fine. I think you keep him on the bench, and if you want to loan him out, I'm not too fussed either. And next we're on to the midfielders. I'm going to start off with Sofyan Amrabat, who's on loan from Fiorentina. He was fantastic last season, helped Fiorentina get to the Conference League final. He also had a fantastic World Cup with Morocco. And you expected more when he first came into Man United. I think we all expected a little bit better. United had to pay an £8.5 million loan fee just to get him, and plus they had to also pay his wages, which was about £3.5 million. That's £12 million for a player who flattered to deceive. And Man United really needed him this season when Casemiro hasn't always been fully fit or even playing out of position. You could play him there in that position, the CDM in the number 6. But Eric Ten Hag decided not to. He decided to play 18-year-old Kobbie Mainoo ahead of him, and at times hadn't even brought him off the bench, even when Man United's midfield looked a little bit leggy. And it is a very expensive loan deal, but I think it's only going to be a loan deal. He's going to stay at that. He's going to leave at the end of the season, and his contract is going to exit. I think it's one where, you know, Man United have an option to buy him permanently for £21.4 million. They're absolutely, definitely not going to be activating that clause, because he has not lived up to the billing for Man United. Maybe it's English football, who knows, but I think it's more Man United isn't the club for him. And now we come on to another difficult one for me, and now we're talking about Casemiro. And he's only 32 years of age, but he's had a dreadful season so far. He's looked leggy at times. He doesn't look like he fits our Ten Hag system. I don't think that he's been helped by the players around him. I think it is a broader issue at Man United, but it's one where he's making individual mistakes, which you don't expect for a player of his caliber. I think it's one where it's really, really difficult. And if you decide to sell him, I don't think it's the end of the world. However, he's only 32 still, which isn't, you know, we've seen players at 36, 37 still playing at the very top level. Just think about the Real Madrid midfield now of Kroos and Modric, still doing it at the very elite. But I think to myself, he needs some legs around him, and Man United absolutely don't have that in any abundance. The midfielders they have just can't stay fit either, and they don't do that running. So I think it's one where he's one of the top earners of the club, but I just can't get out of my head the fact that last year we were talking about Rodri, Partey, Casemiro, who is the best defensive midfielder in the league out of all of those. I think now comfortably, he's not in that conversation. I don't think Thomas Partey is either. I think Rodri is well and truly clear. But I think it's one where he could still be a top player at Man United. I don't agree with Jamie Carragher's comments on Monday Night Football saying he needs to leave, he hasn't got any more, he needs to go to the Saudi or MLS. I think it's one where if Man United get a decent offer from him, and it's only going to be from the Saudi Pro League, I think it's one where you could feasibly see him go there. But at the same time, I just think he's got more in him, I tell you. And I think it's one where you probably sell him if you get a massive offer from the Saudi Pro League. You try and make as much of your money back and you let him go, get his wages off the bill, that's fine. But if you don't, I think it's one where you can't start him, you need to bench him. I think that's what Man United need to do going forward. They need to be looking at the future, whether that's Kobbie Mainoo in the 6, whether that's a new signing, which I think is probably more likely because I think Kobbie Mainoo is more of an 8. But I think it's one where he cannot be the future. He cannot be starting. And between bench and sell, I'm going to put him down for sell just because I think his wages are a massive issue. And if INEOS want to try and rebuild his Man United side, have a fresh start, then I think you do need to get his wages off the bill. And now we come on to the wonder kid himself, Kobbie Mainoo. The 18-year-old has absolutely set the league alight for Man United this season. 27 appearances in all competitions. Not only being capped for Man United made his first senior appearance, he's also been capped by England, which I think is a phenomenal achievement. He looks almost certain to be on the plane for the Euros as well. I think this is very easy for me because he's absolutely a keep. You could make an argument to say that maybe he can just be in the squad and you don't over-rely on him too much, because I think that's a serious issue that Man United might have, and try not to burn him out. But I actually think, he's so good that just give him the keys and let him start. And I think for me, he's got to be starting the Man United side next season. Next, we're going to talk about Christian Eriksen. And I don't think anyone has a bad word to say about Christian Eriksen. I'm sure he's a lovely person. But at 32 years of age and earning 150 grand a week, I think he's not really justifying it, and he's not really got the legs anymore in that United midfield. I think it's only last season we were saying, Casemiro, Eriksen and Bruno were fantastic for Man United, helping them go top 4 and Champions League football. But I think this season he's been really off it, and he's even come out and said that, he's not too happy with the amount of games he's been getting and he needs to be playing more. So with his contract expiring next year, I think it's a player who you sign on free transfer. You sell him now, you get a little bit of change for him, and then you move on with the squad. I think if you sell him, I think that's the right decision for all parties. Next up, we have Scott McTominay, who is now 27 years old, not just a youth prospect from Manchester United's academy anymore. He is a full-fledged first-team member and someone who's very decisive, got a lot of game time under the likes of Ollie. He's got tarnished that whole McFred persona that he's got given and tagged with. But I think it's one where this season he's actually done really well because of the fact that it's been used in the right situations at the right times. But when you use him as a rotation player in games such as the cup competitions, and then you bring him on off the bench to try and get a winner at the end, I think that's when he's at his best at club football. This season he's Man United's third highest goal scorer in all competitions with 10. Only Bruno Fernandes, who's first with 15, and Rasmus Hojlund, who's second with 14, have more than him. He's actually got more goals this season than the likes of Garnacho, Rashford, Martial, Mount, Anthony, and I think it's one where you can't complain this season, especially because he's been used in the right way. And I think you can just keep him in a squad and you can bench him for next season. I think he's not going to complain. He absolutely loves being at Manchester United, and if you just give him a squad role, I think he'll be more than happy with that. I think it's one where his contract expires next year, but you do have an option to extend it by one more further year if you want to. So I think it's one you keep him and you bench him. Now we have the captain of Manchester United, Bruno Fernandes, and I think this is a very easy decision for me. 15 goals and 11 assists this season. In a season where people have said he's not necessarily been at his best, I think he has been still really, really good. Maybe not hit the levels you expect from him, but I think that's a whole function of the team just not performing as well as they did last year. So I think it's very easy. Where on earth would Man United be without Bruno Fernandes? So you keep Bruno Fernandes and you also start him. I think there might be a conversation coming up very soon with his contract expiring in 3 years' time. So maybe next summer when he's got 2 years and he's going to be 30 years old, do you maybe offer him a new one or do you try and cash in then? But I think definitely for next season, you absolutely keep him. Next up, we've got Mason Mount, and he's a player, again, like so many others in this Man United squad, who suffered terribly with injuries this season. He signed from Chelsea in the summer for £55 million with a £5 million add-on, £60 million in total, and he absolutely hasn't lived up to the billing yet. But I think it's only his first season. We all know he's a quality player. He's an England international as well. But I think it is one where he came in to try and replace Christian Eriksen, get a few more legs, be a bit more defensive in that midfield as well, alongside Casemiro, and help him out and be the legs that he needs to be. However, that doesn't quite materialise, and we all expect to see Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount play together with Casemiro just behind it. Hasn't quite worked out. He definitely needs a bit more time because we know he's a quality player, and you can't just write off a £16 million signing in just one season where they've been injured. We need to see what he performs on the pitch. But I think Man United are in desperate need of some legs in that midfield, and that could be Mount, but I think we'll have to wait and see how, depending on how his injury goes and his recovery does. But I think he's just a bench for now. He could potentially be a starter, but I think he just needs to work his way back into fitness and then start some more games of football. Next up, we have a bit of a forgotten man, Donny van de Beek, who is still at Manchester United. And in fact, I had to Google where he's playing at the moment because I was looking at it and I was like, well, he hasn't played a single game for Man United. He's actually on loan at Eintracht Frankfurt, and he joined them in January. I didn't actually know that per se. I had to Google that. I mean, he did start the first half of the season at Man United, played 19 minutes in the EFL third round game against Palace. Then he played 2 minutes in the league against Crystal Palace in the game that they lost 1-0. He's been available since he joined Frankfurt for 15 of the 16 games he played this season. He's played in 8, but he's only totaled 357 minutes. And I think this is quite easy. He's had a terrible time with injuries. You thought that Eriksen coming in would, rejuvenate his career. It hasn't quite worked out. And not only for Man United's sake, but for his own sake. A player who was considered one of the best in Europe at his time at Ajax. He needs to leave, he needs to be sold, and he needs to get his own career back on track. Next, we have Hannibal Mejbri, who is 21 years old, still a very promising young talent. He's on loan at Sevilla at the moment. However, he's only played 5 matches so far, totaling 95 minutes. For a side who are 12th in La Liga, that isn't the best return for a player on loan there. And he's had a bit of a falling out there as well with the Sevilla manager, who said he's got a bit of an ego and therefore he's been bombed out of the squad for periods of time. And it's one where it hasn't really worked out, but now you have to question his mentality as well and his professionalism and whether he really wants to make it at Man United either, and he probably not. So his contract expiring next summer, I think it absolutely has to be a sell, and it's such a shame because I think there is promise and potential in him. You just need whether he can get it out of himself. And in fact, Sevilla had an option to buy him for £17 million. No, that's not an error. £17 million. That would have been an absolute steal for Man United had they managed to, con Sevilla for getting that much money. I don't think it's worth that much. I think they can probably get a few million for him, but he needs to leave Man United. Next up, we have another youngster, Daniel Gore, who's a 19-year-old central midfielder and actually on loan at Port Vale. He joined them from January. However, he hasn't had the best of time there. He got injured when he started a game of football for them, and ever since then he hasn't really got back into the side. He's also still been injured for periods of this season, and he hasn't really impressed when he did get his opportunity, which also hasn't helped him get back into the team. So it's one where the loan spell hasn't been going great for him. He's 19 years of age, so there's still plenty of time for him to make a comeback from it. I think it's one where he needs to get another loan at another club and maybe get some more minutes, but at the moment I think he's definitely not fit for Man United. He's not going to be playing first team football, and that makes our first player in the loan category. And another youngster, Shola Shoretire, 20 years of age at the moment, and he actually signed his first professional contract with Man United when he was 16 back in 2021, and he had a lot of promise, but he hasn't quite kicked on since then. And now it's a situation where his contract actually expires in the summer, and he's been making some noises recently saying he's not sure he wants to be at Man United. And I tell you what, even as a rival fan, if you don't want to be at Man United, then don't be there. I think Man United let his contract exit, and then he leaves in the summer. Now we're going to move on to the forwards, and this is a very easy one. We're going to start off with Anthony Martial, who has had a torrid time in Man United, and the whole post for Sir Alex Ferguson era can probably be defined by one player, and it is probably Martial himself. Joined from Monaco in 2015, and at the time he was the world's most expensive teenager. We all know about that Ballon d'Or clause in his contract, which has been haunting him ever since. And he started off really well under Louis van Gaal, kind of faded away a little bit under Jose Mourinho because he preferred a bit of a target man number 9, and Martial gets shoehorned to the left. He had the whole drama about him changing his shirt number as well, which he wasn't very happy with because he was trying to establish a bit of a brand. But ever since then, injuries have massively curtailed what could have been a really promising career, and it's always going to be one of those, I think, with Martial, of what could have been one of those players. If injuries didn't ruin him, who knows what level he could have reached. And it's not his fault that he's always injured, but I do think I think it's time for Man United and Anthony Martial to part ways, and you let his contract exit this summer. Next up, we have Mason Greenwood, and I'm not going to spend too long talking about him because I think this is quite easy for me. I think he's going to come up with a lot of off-field issues, which you probably don't need if you're Man United, especially under the new ownership of Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS taking over. You probably just want a fresh start. So I think there's going to be a few clubs, that maybe in Spain as well, who would definitely want to buy him. I think you sell him to him and you make pure profit from a youth academy player, and then we move on. Next up, we have Anthony, and this is going to probably be one of those players who goes down as the biggest flop in Premier League history. At least so far, there's still time for him to turn it around. I just don't think that's going to happen, if we're being honest. He's had 2 seasons at Man United now. Actually did alright in his first season, you know. He's got 10 goals and 5 assists in all competitions. But this year he's only got 3 goals, and you know, he scored his first Premier League goal of the season a couple of weeks ago against Burnley. He got a goal against Liverpool in the FA Cup, which is really promising and really good. But I just don't think, you know, he's quite fit out for the Premier League. I don't think his attitude is great either. That's just a personal thing. I just see, sometimes I see him bickering on the pitch, and I just think, what are you doing? Get behind the team. I don't quite like it. But with 3 years left on his contract, signing for 80 million, Man United are nowhere near going to get anything what they paid for him. So what I think they should personally do is, I think they should loan him out for a season, let him regain his confidence, and maybe get a bit of form as well, and then they could get somewhat a measly fee for him next year when he's only got 2 years left on his contract. Next we got Facundo Pellistri, who I think is a promising player. He's still only 22 years of age and he's got a lot of potential, but I think he might be one of those players which peaks on a little bit earlier. And he's had a decent loan spell at Granada since he joined them in January. Since he joined, they've had 12 matches. He's been in the squad for 11 of those. He was injured for the other one. He's played 10 times and he came on as a sub once. He's got 2 goals and 2 assists so far this season. And I think it's one where he's actually quietly done quite okay. But the issue is that Granada are a side who are going to get relegated from La Liga. They're not mathematically relegated yet, but they are in 19th place. They're 11 points off safety with 4 games to go. So they are basically going to get relegated. So I think it's one where he's not quite good enough to come back into his Man United side. So I think the best thing for his own development is to go back out on loan again. And I think maybe the year after, he needs to have a good loan spell soon, and then we can bring back into the Man United squad. But if I'm letting all these forwards go, I definitely need to be keeping some of them, and I'm definitely going to be doing that with Amad Diallo. I think a player who's got a very bright future ahead of him in his footballing career, and I think one where he can have a very bright future at Man United. He's only played 9 times so far this season. He's got 1 goal, which was against Liverpool in the FA Cup, which was the winner. What a fantastic goal that was, a fantastic goal for him, especially considering he's had a terrible time with injuries this season, like a lot of these Man United players. But don't forget, it was only last season where he was tearing up the Championship with Sunderland, getting 14 goals and 4 assists in the process. I think it's one where we all really hoped for him to kick on this year. Man United have had a terrible time trying to sort out the right hand side of the attack. It's always seemed like a bit of a cursed position, and I'm not too sure he's good enough to start right now, but I definitely would like him to get a few more minutes. I don't know why Ten Hag hasn't been using him more when he has been fit, but I think he's definitely in the squad, and I think he's a bench at the moment, but I think he needs to work his way into that starting lineup, whereas I think Pellistri is a little bit further away, so I think that's why he needs to be alone and Amad Diallo doesn't. Next up we have Omari Forson, who's still a very young talent, 19 years of age. He's 20 in July, and he's only made 6 appearances for Man United this season, a couple of the bench, a couple of them being starts. But I think it's getting to a stage now with him where he's probably a bit too good to be playing in the under-21s, but he's probably not quite good enough for the first team just yet. And I think there's a couple of players ahead of him in the pecking order, so I think it's one where for his own development, I think he needs to go out on loan for now. I'm Romish there now, starting off with Alejandro Garnacho. The 19-year-old has been absolutely phenomenal since making his debut for Manchester United. 9 goals and 5 assists so far this season in all competitions. Can play left wing and right wing, and I think he's been a real shining light for Man United this season. And Man United absolutely need to keep him. The only question I have is, do you bench him or do you start him? Because I think there's going to be a real great argument to be made here that he's doing such a fantastic job out on that right when Rashford is playing, that maybe you could keep him as a right winger. But then also, he's sometimes doing better than Rashford, and he isn't always getting that opportunity because he's a bit of a younger player. Rashford is more established. So I think whether it's left wing or right wing, I think it's one where you maybe do need to start starting Alejandro Garnacho going forward, because I think he is the future and he does look incredibly promising. And speaking of Marcus Rashford, we're up to him next, and this is a difficult one as well, because a lot of people have a lot to say about Marcus Rashford, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. If you focus on just on the football pitch, I think he is a phenomenal talent. The issue is we don't always see that talent every game and consistently. He seems to quite have a good season and a bad season, and I think the top players are consistently good no matter what. This year he's done okay, he got 8 goals and 5 assists in all competitions, but we see the quality that he has in him. I think in particular that goal against Manchester City away in the derby, that just goes to show that, you know, he's got that quality, but we need to see it a bit more often. I think you can definitely critique his off-the-ball work rate. I think at times he's been so close to the ball and just needs to make an extra yard in the press, and he just doesn't do it. But I'm not sure if that's him or if that's a whole Man United side, because I see that from a lot of players. But I think he gets the heat of that a lot. But I absolutely think the Man United should be keeping Marcus Rashford, trying to keep with their homegrown talent, trying to keep the best that the academy produces. However, I think with his inconsistency in terms of seasons, maybe he's not the starter anymore. I mean, you could definitely make a case for him starting, and I don't think that'd be the end of the world. But I think it's now where maybe at some point you need to look and say, right, either a new left winger or maybe Garnacho, if he starts to step up, needs to be taking the place ahead of him I think it's one where you need to put Marcus Rashford on the bench, and then maybe we'll have to have a conversation about whether he's good enough for the squad, and hopefully what you get is him competing for that number 1 shirt. Obviously with him we also got to give a bit of an asterisk because his combination with Luke Shaw down the left hand side was absolutely electrifying for Man United, and a big issue of why he hasn't been performing is because Luke Shaw hasn't been performing. So it's another reason why Luke Shaw should be staying, but also let's see Rashford in form with Luke Shaw, and if he's still not performing then I think you can have some serious questions. And we come on to the penultimate player now, Jadon Sancho, and again, like a couple of others, this is a very decisive player who a lot of people think Man United should actually be keeping. Some people think they should actually be selling him. And people say just keep him on the bench and let him work his way back into the squad. Where do I sit? Well, I don't think him and Erik ten Hag are going to be able to play for the same club again. I think it's either or. And a lot of the time, I think to myself, you can't let player power win. You have to give it to the manager. So despite the fact that I'm not 100% convinced on Erik ten Hag, and I think he himself might have one foot out the door, I don't think you can, succumb to the demands of one player. And I think it might be at this moment where United isn't the right club for Sancho, and Sancho isn't the right player for Man United at the moment, which is mental to say because you've seen his performances recently in the Champions League, and I think that's just highlighted the bad management and the bad atmosphere at Man United, because he can go to Dortmund, do fantastically well, and now he's in the Champions League final. But I think you can make an argument for wrong player at the wrong time, and I'm going to say it's sell, but it's incredibly sad because if Man United can make it work with Jadon Sancho, I think they absolutely should. But it seems like him and Erik ten Hag just won't be able to make up. And our last player is Rasmus Hojlund, only 21 years of age, 14 goals and 2 assists in all competitions this season, and he's had to probably play a lot more football than he's expecting, and probably Man United were expecting, just because of the fact that he's been the only fit striker. Anthony Martial, who we've talked about, hasn't been fit for a large portion of the season, which meant that they've had an over-reliance on Rasmus Hojlund, who's still very young. I think he's done fantastically just to get a goal return of 16 this season, and he's absolutely a keep, and he's also a start because I think you invest in him because he's so young and he can prove to you he can definitely be a number 9 for Man United going forward at the very elite level. But there we have it. There's my tier list for assessing the entire Man United squad. Those are the 8 players that are at start, the 8 players that are bench, which means that, for a 25-man squad, Man United still need another 9 players this summer, which is a lot of an ask. 4 players at loan. I'll be selling 1, 2, 3, 6, 9 of the Man United players, and I'll be letting 7 of them exit on a free this summer. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with what I said? Do you disagree? And if you disagree, let me know where you disagree on. Subscribe to the Football Fellowship, and we will see you in the next one.